Allow me to present you with a scenario. You work at a firm downtown in some sort of big city, all right? You do a very good job at all the work that has been presented to you from this company. So good that the CEO of the company even knows who you are. You're very well liked among your peers. And, well, you always do a respectable job of everything that's presented to you. So you're very well trusted. And one day you happen to win $20 off of a lottery card. And you decide, you know what? I'm going to take these $20 and I'm going to go out for a drink with my coworker. And this coworker is someone who's helped you through many of these projects and has been a very good friend to you. So you tell them the good news, and you two leave work that evening together to walk through the streets to go to a pub you've always gone to for drinks and enjoy yourselves. And as you're talking and walking through the busy city streets, this thick fog rolls in, and all the other people around you seem to vanish, and the two of you are left alone in this eerie setting as three strangers walk up to you. The first stranger walks up to you and says, "That was some pretty good luck winning $20 off a random lottery card. That should help you have a good evening." The second one walks up to you and says, "But that's not the best news they've received tonight. Come on now. They're running the new project directly under the CEO." And the third one walks up to you and says, "But even better still, are they not the CEO themselves?" Now you're sitting here thinking, none of this could possibly be true. I mean, I don't know how they knew about the $20 in the lottery card, but me running a project under the CEO or being the CEO themselves, there's no way that's true. And you and your coworker friend are pretty much ready to just laugh at this kind of absurdity when the strangers now walk up to your coworker and say, "Well, your luck isn't quite as good as your friends here, but it's not your luck you should be concerned with. Your sons will be CEOs. Now that's something to think about, and pretty good luck if I do say so myself." And before you can even ask any more questions or give these strangers any retorts, you blink, and it's if they're gone, disappeared, vanished. The fog has gone away, all the pedestrians on the street have reappeared before your eyes, and it's almost as if you and your coworker friend were just standing in the middle of the street, taking up space. And just as you and your friend are about to discuss how absurd that scenario was, you get a phone call, and it's from your office. So you decide to pick it up since you did leave about 10 minutes ago. It's possible they need a little something extra from you. And the person on the other end of the line is the CEO of your company. And they say to you, "Hey, sorry for calling you so late after work. I just wanted to congratulate you on your promotion." And so you're left a little dumbfounded and response of, what? I don't know what you mean. I wasn't promoted." And the CEO replies back, "Oh, sorry, somebody must not have told you. It's end of the day on a Friday. I mean, it's somebody was bound to forget. That's probably my fault. Um, but since you haven't heard, you can hear it from me. I put you in charge of the next project that I'm looking to run directly under me. So, congrats." And after some goodbyes, you hang up the phone and you tell your coworker friend exactly what just happened. And you're both left in silence for a while as you think about how those strangers happened to know that you would get promoted to that specific project. But now, you in particular are also left to wonder, two of their little prophecies have come true. What about the third? Am I to be the next CEO as they speak of? Or was it all just nonsense and coincidence? All right, so the scenario I just ran you through is the same type of scenario that our main character of what we're going to review today, Macbeth, is run through in the very first act of the play. So I've let you kind of sit in his shoes for a little while in a similar, more, I guess, modern debate version of the sort of prophecies that are proposed to him in the very first act and opening. So, if it wasn't already very clear, as from the wheel spin and your scenario, we're going to review Macbeth today, with some very fun help from the manga classics version of Macbeth. Yes, I own a manga copy of Macbeth, which does translate some of it to air quotes modern English. I say air quotes on this because it still maintains the very rhymey scripture that Shakespeare oh so loves, and that Times English oh so loved. So we'll go through that. Now, I wanted to run by what our order of operations is going to be here in this review because we briefly talked about it in the rules video I put out, but let's be honest, that was a very short one and it was very brief and didn't go over much. So let's solidify things more so here. All right, so here's the format we're going to stick to. One, we're going to do a summary of the story of Macbeth. So we're going to go through basically all the different arcs, what happens generally in the story, and just kind of a summary of the whole thing. That'll help get a good perspective for everybody of the characters and the world before we do a deep dive into it. And they'll get my opinions on the actual bits and pieces of the story after that and a little bit later as well. Once we're done with the summary, we'll dive into the characters. We'll start with our protagonist, go to antagonists, and then go into supporting cast, and possibly some others, depending on if they're really needed to be talked about in that sector. And then, following our characters, we will take a look at the story that the world is built around here. That one in particular for a Shakespeare play is a bit questionable, but we'll get to that when we get to it. And once the world is done being covered, I'll just kind of give my last thoughts, give an overview, a general score to this story, and then immediately after I'm done editing this video, I'll do my next wheel spin, and that'll be released next Sunday. So fun, fun. But enough of all that, and let's get right into it. Now, just before we actually cover the story, I should also point out what we're really reviewing. Because, yes, we're reviewing the story of Macbeth, the Shakespearean play, but what I mean by what we're reviewing is what materials I actually used to conduct this review. So, for one, yes, I read the actual script to the play. I mean, that would seem like the most important thing to do. I have the complete works of Shakespeare sitting on my bookshelf, so whipped that out and read through it. But here's the thing reviewing something like a book, it's always good in a video like this to have some sort of visuals to go with it because, yes, I can express things in my own words, which is great, but having something visual to go along with it so you can kind of see and get your own feeling from the imagery itself is great. That's what makes things easy when it comes to reviewing, say, a TV show or a video game, because visuals are all interconnected into the whole thing. So what I have for us today that went along with the script was my manga classics Macbeth with modern day English. And there should be a picture of it on the screen now, in post and editing. But I read through this entire book, and it is quite literally just the story of Macbeth put together as a manga. So they have designs for all the characters, they fit all the personalities, they give you visuals that go along with all the different things they're saying, even some of the more interesting ones from some of the different soliloquies that the characters actually speak of, even getting visuals as to certain analogies they talk about. But it helps to kind of picture what goes with the story. So that was actually a fun little read to go with everything. And before you ask, I mean, I am not afraid to say that I have a manga copy of Macbeth. I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to everything for the most part, so at this point, this should not surprise you and really should not surprise you going forward. All right, so here's a short summary of Macbeth as I've come to know it. This should be pretty quick because we're not going to get into too many of the details. Okay, so future Sunday here, I may have quite literally just lied 2 seconds ago. While I say this is a brief summary, it's gonna take a while because, well, you'll see. Just bear with me. The play opens with three witches. They're saying how a lot of fair things will become foul and a lot of foul things will become fair. We'll get to that later. We're now shown King Duncan, who currently reigns over Scotland, who is being informed of his cousin Macbeth's achievements on the battlefield. He is currently wondering whether there was success or failure. His servants tell him that Macbeth fought extremely hard, even identified a traitor in their ranks, who happened to be the Thane of Cawdor, and took both the enemy and the traitor down. King Duncan, very pleased with his work, decides that he shall name Macbeth, his cousin, the Thane of Cawdor, in addition to his other current responsibilities. From here, we now flip over to Macbeth and his friend Banquo, who are currently walking back from the battle. And as they're discussing how the day is kind of very so so, the three witches appear before Macbeth and Banquo. They approach Macbeth specifically and name him the Thane of Glamis, a title he already has, along with the Thane of Cawdor, a title he has not yet received, and also they name him, most importantly, King of Scotland. Macbeth and Banquo kind of call bull on this and say there's no way that could be the case. And Banquo also states, well, if you know Macbeth's fate, what about mine? If you know everything, what's going on with me? And the witches walk up to Banquo and say, well, there's nothing going on with you, but while you won't be king, your sons will. And before Macbeth and Banquo can protest anymore, the witches up and disappear and vanish. And before they can even question whether these witches told them the truth or just outright lies, these two gentlemen show up, messengers of King Duncan, who exclaim that Macbeth is now the Thane of Cawdor, ironically enough, just like the witches said he would be. So, both Macbeth and Banquo kind of step to the side, and Banquo kind of warns Macbeth that while this came true, the most dangerous truths are half truths. And they're, to be avoided at all costs, basically. And they head on back to the king's palace to have an audience with him while thinking about this stuff. And Macbeth kind of says, "Well, if I'm supposed to be king, then let that fate happen. It'll happen at some point. If the opportunity comes by, so be it." Now we flip back to the palace in Scotland, where King Duncan, uh, you know, decides to have an audience with both Macbeth and Banquo to congratulate them on a job well done and also to congratulate his cousin Macbeth on the new title he's received. But he also has some interesting news to share with them. He has decided his eldest son, Malcolm, will be the heir to his throne, and that they should now have a feast to celebrate this momentous occasion as well as the victories and triumph of battle. So, it is chosen for Macbeth's castle to be the, you know, place they will host said festivities. Macbeth leaves ahead of everybody else to go home and prepare, all the while trying to push dark thoughts out of his head about how the witches said he was to be king, but if Malcolm sits on the throne, then he will never sit on the throne. So, does he have to do something nefarious to gain the throne for himself? Those kinds of thoughts are something he pushes out of his head. Meanwhile, back at Macbeth's castle, Lady Macbeth, his spouse, is reading a letter that Macbeth sent far ahead of time to inform her about the details that the witch prophesized. Such as him being the Thane of Glamis, Cawdor, and the King of Scotland, furthermore. Lady Macbeth kind of now wonders whether the only way to make him king is through murder, and if that's the case, she wants all the evil spirits around to join with her to make a successful murder plan here, and she'll later convince Macbeth to actually go through with said plan when he finally arrives home. After Lady Macbeth does some convincing and Macbeth agrees to go through with this murder plan, King Duncan arrives along with his eldest son, Malcolm, who is the heir to the throne, and his youngest son, who is also just kind of a tag along throughout the story. He's not mentioned too much. The other people joining the festivities that are important here are Banquo and Banquo's son, Fleance. They'll come into the story a little bit later, but for now they're just here to celebrate. So, they have a good evening, they have lots of drinks, they sing, they dance, the usual, and Macbeth eventually steps to the side, and he's kind of thinking now, well, crud. King Duncan's actually a very good king. He's been great to his people and he's been great to me. I'd feel horrible killing him. And so Lady Macbeth catches wind of this and pulls him aside and it's like, listen, I know you're hesitating now, but are you a coward or are you a man? Because if you're a man, you're gonna do this. Like now. We'll get to the actual twistedness of this scene far later in the character description, but suffice it to say, Macbeth is now ready to go through with the plan once more. Speaking of which, what's their murder plan? Very simply put, the king has these servants who will watch his bedroom at night. So, the plan is that Lady Macbeth is going to make sure they are extremely drunk so that they pass out and can't really do their job. Macbeth will steal their daggers, go into King Duncan's room, kill him with said daggers, and he will plant the daggers back on the servants and cover them in King Duncan's blood to make it look as though he is the one at fault. Now, this is if everything goes to plan. And as this is a tragedy, this does not go to plan. So, Macbeth starts to hallucinate as he approaches King Duncan's room. Slight bit of foreshadowing here. Hallucinating a dagger pointing in the exact direction of Duncan. So, he goes up, takes the daggers off the sleeping men, and commits the deed and kills King Duncan. Now, rather than following the plan, he ends up taking these daggers in a, state of panic, and while covered in blood, runs over to Lady Macbeth, who is all the way downstairs, outside of said tower that Duncan is sleeping in, to proclaim that he basically regrets it now and he feels like he's going to go mad because he just killed someone that the heavens would probably proclaim as a saint. So, since he can't go back there in his state of panic, Lady Macbeth's basically like, okay, you're a pansy, give me the daggers, I'll go do it myself. So she runs off back into the tower where Duncan sleeps to actually finish planting the daggers and covering the servants in blood, while Macbeth tries to recompose himself and get to sleep for the night. Morning rolls around, and Shakespeare always inserts some sort of comedy scene into his plays. Small one takes place here with the door porter, where somebody is knocking on the door and he kind of starts to make up a bunch of guesses and lines as to who it could be that's knocking at the door. However, as you would imagine, when somebody doesn't open the door for you after you've knocked about 3 times, you'd probably get pretty pissed. And so the porter opens the door for them. We find the person knocking in the morning here was a new character named Macduff, who is narratively Macbeth's foil. His job here was to pick up King Duncan in the morning and take him back to the castle. So he goes in, greets Macbeth, and walks into King Duncan's tower, only to find a very gruesome scene before his eyes of servants covered in blood holding bloody daggers, and King Duncan murdered in cold blood in his bed. Macduff decides to sound the alarm, wake everybody up, and basically bring to everyone's attention that their king, Duncan, is now dead, much to everyone's surprise, except for, of course, Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Now, to finish what he started, Macbeth goes in with a different Thane to investigate the tower for themselves, since Macduff really doesn't want to go back in there since the scene was absolutely horrible. So Macduff stays outside while Macbeth and another Thane go in to investigate things. And Macbeth kills the 2 servants out of quote unquote anger seeing them covered in Duncan's blood, sort of to close off any loose ends. Now, obviously, at the news, King Duncan's 2 sons are very disturbed and do not feel safe in their surroundings since the murderer could still be lurking around, so they decide to flee from Macbeth's castle. It's decided that Malcolm is going to flee to England, the eldest and heir to the throne, whereas the other brother is going to flee to Ireland. And from here on, we really don't hear of the younger brother ever again. So that's why I did not even care to remember his name. Moving on from here, some time passes, and Macbeth is now to be crowned king in Scone. The only person who doesn't attend his coronation is Macduff, who decides to go back home to check on some things in his thanedom, which is Fief. Now, at the coronation, Macbeth announces that there's going to be a feast afterwards that evening where all the nobles and thanes are invited to kind of gather together and celebrate. Uh, Banquo, Macbeth's best friend, obviously, decides he'll be attending said banquet, but only after he goes for an evening ride with his son, Fleance. Now, Banquo leaves on this evening ride with Fleance, and we see that Macbeth has now hired some killers to go murder Banquo and Fleance out on the road. Reason being, Macbeth fears Banquo, as Banquo is a man who is always willing to do the right thing, and knows for a fact that if Banquo were to suspect some things and find a few things out, he would kill Macbeth over killing Duncan. So he decides to have him killed. But not only Banquo. He also decides Fleance is to be killed due to the witch's prophecy stating that Fleance, being the first, and the rest of the descending sons would all be kings. So, in a sense, what's the crown I've earned if none of my heirs are ever going to get it? Now, we get to see that Banquo and Fleance are indeed intercepted on the road by these killers. Unfortunately, Banquo is actually killed in this attempt. It's pretty sad to see him go, since he's a pretty smart character. However, in his sort of last moments, he ends up making enough room for his son Fleance to escape and flee off. We never see him again, but it is proclaimed that he is alive and well. Afterwards, this is brought to Macbeth's attention, who, is actually pretty pleased that even half the job was done, and decides that they'll worry about the issue of Fleance a little bit later. Now, it's time to actually enjoy themselves, feast, celebrate their success at this banquet. Or it would be if Macbeth wasn't slowly losing his mind, as he now starts to picture the ghost of dead Banquo sitting in his throne at the feast table. He causes a whole uproar about it, makes a big scene, and stink of how nobody else sees this dead Banquo sitting in the throne, which causes all these other nobles and, higher ranking individuals to kind of start to question his sanity a little bit and see whether he's actually healthy or not. Lady Macbeth also becomes concerned, more so for the fact that she doesn't want these recent murders to actually be revealed. So she tells everyone to go home for the evening and that some rest would do the king well. It's just been a long day. She steps aside to talk to Macbeth and be like, hey, that was dumb. Let's not do that again, right? This is just a passing thing, I hope. And Macbeth kind of goes, yeah, all right, that was a bit of a passing thing, my bad. I need to go find the witches again because they'll tell me more about my prophecy so I can, feel safe and secure about everything rather than being in my own head about all this stuff. So, now we finally get to flip back to the witches, who are currently celebrating at fooling Macbeth very easily. However, their master, Hecate, shows up to kind of ruin their parade and says, hey, look, I get what you did was pretty funny, but you were supposed to include me in on that too because I give you your power. So here's how we're going to do things. Macbeth is going to show up again asking for more information. You're going to brew a potion that's going to make this avatar appear, and you're going to tell Macbeth these sort of half truths and things that are going to make him feel secure. And then we'll be able to give the correct ending and spin on this as was originally intended and correct your mistakes. The witches end up agreeing to this proposition, not that it really seems they have much of a choice to, and eagerly prepare and await for Macbeth's arrival. So, The following day, Macbeth does in fact find the witches once more, currently finishing up their potion, and he more so demands to know the rest of his fate. He needs to know the other details of this prophecy, like word for word. And so the witches say, well, we can't, but we know an entity that can. And so they activate the potion that's in their cauldron, and this smoke bubbles up to form all kinds of different images. And basically, the gist of it is this: 1. Macbeth needs to fear Macduff. 2. Macbeth has nothing to fear so long as Burnham Forest does not move. And 3. Macbeth will not be harmed by any man that was born directly from the womb of a woman. Now, even after hearing these things, Macbeth isn't fully satisfied with everything that the witches have told him so far. So, what he asks to learn more about now was Banquo's original prophecy, the one that stated his sons would be kings. And the imagery kind of goes into more detail about how Banquo's sons were not only to be kings of Scotland, but kings of England at the same time as well, which Macbeth kind of takes as this being a load of bull and says there's no way that that could happen and demands more answers. However, the witches deny him those answers and disappear very quickly. After which, Macbeth is leaving to go back to the kingdom when a servant comes to find him and tell him that Macduff has currently fled to England. Now, since the witches told Macbeth to fear Macduff, he decides to take a preemptive approach to this and send an army, including himself, to go attack Macduff's castle and kill the rest of his family. Pretty dirt move, if you ask me, but hey, that's kind of where this is going right now and where Macbeth's head is going right now. Now we get to do a flip to Macduff, who is currently in England and has just found Malcolm, who is attempting to state to Macduff that he really doesn't believe he's fit to be king. When Macduff asks why, Malcolm states that, well, he's not fit to be king because he has many things about him that are very sinful and not really leader like qualities. Going on to state about how infinite numbers of women couldn't satisfy his lust, as well as any infinite amount of gold could not sate his appetite for greed and more power, and that if he were to become, the king of Scotland, Scotland would be no better off than with its current tyrant Macbeth, and, well, frankly, would be worse off with him leading. To this, Macduff kind of responds, well, then Scotland is lost because I would not take you back to be king then. After such a response, Malcolm states that all of that was actually made up just to test Macduff to see whether he truly had Scotland's best interests at heart, regardless of heirs and thrones and royal lineage and bloodlines. Malcolm further goes on to prove this by stating that the King of England has actually given him a substantial amount of troops, somewhere around 10,000 if I remember correctly, including England's greatest warrior named Siward. Now, a messenger from Scotland shows up into the scene, uh, claiming that Macduff's castle has been sieged and all of his servants, his children, and his wife are in fact dead. So Macduff is very reasonably overcome with grief and anger, and Malcolm encourages him to basically stand up and finish this as he can take revenge on Macbeth for such a travesty. Macduff kind of responds at first being like, I will face this like a man will, but I also need to feel like a man will first. So after he grieves for a little bit and decides that revenge is what he needs, uh, they decide to set out with their new army and, Siward, the greatest warrior in tow, to head to Scotland for war. Now, from here, we do a bit of an interesting jump and go back to Macbeth's castle. And we focus here on two servants who are discussing a rumor while walking throughout the halls at night of how Lady Macbeth has been sleepwalking recently, and discussing about how surely it can't be true. And then, before their eyes, as if almost it's a coincidence, Lady Macbeth appears, but she is wearing her nightgown and currently sleepwalking. At first, they decide they might leave because this is a rather awkward scenario, when they then start to hear her speak, as she starts to yell, "Out, damn spot! I command you to come out," rubbing her hands back and forth over and over again. And then she speaks of all the blood that's on her hands after helping Macbeth commit the deed and plot and plan to kill King Duncan. She further talks about the hired murderers to kill Banquo, and even furthermore, different murderers hired to kill the rest of Macduff's family. At the sound of this, the servants sort of flee in terror and exclaim how they really can't tell anybody else about this, because if they did, it would be their heads, basically. Now, we flip back to Macbeth, who is now donning his battle armor as he prepares for war, as he's told by his scouts that an army from England, led by Malcolm, is currently on its way to his castle. He sets out an order for the rest of his troops to get ready and prepare for battle, and also orders the fortifications of his castle to be enhanced multiple times, almost as if he's a madman, just because he fears for his own safety, despite the witch's assurances that he will be fine. Now, his men were ordered to go prepare for arms and prepare for battle. However, if it isn't already evident, the conditions in Scotland since Macbeth became king have been absolutely horrible. So, a lot of the Thanes of Scotland decide they are going to leave Macbeth and go join Macduff and Malcolm's army to take Scotland back for its rightful ruler. Now, with these Thanes going to join Malcolm's army, we actually follow them out to where Malcolm is. He is currently at a very familiar sounding name, Burnham Woods, or Burnham Forest, which the witches sort of prophesized about, if you remember. Malcolm comes up with an ingenious plan to disguise the numbers of his army to try and fool scouts. So, what he has all his soldiers do is cut branches off the trees and hold them in front of them as they march, so that way some of their numbers will be hidden behind the leaves and branches. Now we flip back to Macbeth, who is atop his castle walls, currently talking to some of his soldiers about the battle plans and if the fortifications of the castle are kind of all done and ready to go, when a servant runs up to him and tells him some very unfortunate news that Lady Macbeth is dead. Apparently, she leapt off of one of the highest points in the castle due to unfortunate illness, probably from the sleepwalking, as it's mentioned. After being a little sad that his wife is dead, although not as sad as you would think, and proclaiming that, well, he thinks it just must have been her time, very obviously, and that she wasn't really a part of his prophecies, so he couldn't have protected her. Another scout approaches Macbeth and is kind of hesitant to tell him of the news he has. So Macbeth basically says, "Tell me the news, and if you're wrong, I'll have your head, but if you're right, you can probably hang my head if you're that worried about it." And so the scout says, "All right, well, sir, I don't know how to say this, but we looked out towards Burnham Woods, and it looks like the woods is moving." So Macbeth obviously begins to fear for his life and say, "There's no way that the forest is moving." And the scout says, "Well, sir, look over there. You can see it for yourself from like 3 miles away. Look." And so Macbeth leans over the castle walls, and sure enough, he sees what looks to be the forest moving towards them. At this point, Macbeth kind of realizes that there was some loopholes in these rules that the witches kind of gave him about him living, and decides, you know what? I'll accept this fate. At least I'll die in battle rather than lying on my back, is what he states. And so he calls the rest of his soldiers to arms and to prepare for the charge that is to happen on his castle, as he kind of notices that really it's not the forest moving, but in fact a bunch of soldiers. So, surely enough, the battle begins as Malcolm commands all of his soldiers to toss their branches into the air, revealing the full force of his army. And so Malcolm, Macduff, Siward's son, along with all the other thanes of Scotland and the 10,000 soldiers, charge at Macbeth's castle for a bit of a final confrontation. As the final battle progresses, it's noted that forces have been lost from both sides, not very significantly from Malcolm's forces, but more so from Macbeth's. We're taken inside the castle to Macbeth, who is currently running around killing any enemy soldiers that he can, sort of trying to live and end his life in whatever way he wants to, not the way fate has it in store. When Macbeth comes face to face with Siward's son. Siward's son asks him who he is, and Macbeth proclaims that he should fear the name Macbeth, for it will be the last thing he hears. So, the two prepare for a duel, and unfortunately, Siward's son is stabbed directly through the chest by Macbeth, ending their duel rather swiftly. Macbeth now runs throughout the castle, and eventually runs into Macduff, who confronts him about the murder of all of his children, servants, and wife. Macbeth just states that it was necessary for him to be king, and they begin to have their final duel. Now, throughout this, Macbeth gets pretty arrogant and decides to state, hey, you can't kill me. I was told that I would not be harmed by any man so long as they were born directly from the womb of a woman. Now, this is where a small twist and a, in between the lines answer kind of comes in from Macduff, as Macduff states, well, I don't really fit in that criteria. I was not born directly from the womb of my mother. My mother's stomach was cut open, and I was pulled from it. And now Macbeth feels true despair as he realizes that he was told to A, fear Macduff, and B, that he couldn't be harmed by any man who had come directly from the womb of a woman, and realizes himself that once again he was played into a false sense of security by the witches, into doing exactly what they wanted him to do. Which ultimately, as you see, ends up being his downfall. We now jump to the end of the confrontation where Malcolm and the great soldier Siward sort of discuss how the other soldiers on the enemy side very quickly laid down their arms after some of their, numbers had dwindled, as they weren't ever really in it to support Macbeth. They were just kind of in it for the money, so they decided at some point when they were losing to just surrender and keep their lives. Now, Macduff emerges from inside the castle, holding Macbeth's head on a pike high in the air, basically saying, the tyrant is dead, the day has been won. Unfortunately, Siward has to grieve a little bit for the loss of his son, but believes he died in a noble cause, as he was stabbed through the chest, and I guess historically that meant he basically fought and died well. But Malcolm pretty much gives a victory speech and declares how Scotland will now be at peace forever, ending off the play. Now, let's do a quick check in on what my thoughts are so far of the narrative and the story after just having covered the summary. So, initially, I was guessing that this would be about a 7 out of 10 for me, just based on what I remembered from having read the story before, all the way back in high school. Now, after having gone through and done the whole summary, I'm still sitting right now just above what I guessed at an 8 out of 10. So currently, my expectation versus the reality of it's been slightly better than what I was thinking it would be, which is pretty good. I mean, in all honesty, the narrative is pretty well constructed, starting from Macbeth's original kind of crux and dilemma, all the way up until the decisions he has to make in order to try and follow through with his own personal goals, as well as everything that he does constantly affecting the world and the other characters around him. It's all pretty well done for a Shakespeare play. And I say this after having read certain plays like, Romeo and Juliet, which is a whole nother disaster piece, which maybe we'll get to another time. But currently, right now, rating is sitting in at 8 out of 10. The real question is, does that change after going through the characters and the world design? Guess we'll find out, right? Now, on that particular note, you've already sat through me blabbering for about 40 minutes, probably, if you've made it this far, which, if you have, congratulations, you've listened to me talk for 40 minutes. Great use of your time. However, I could technically blab on for another 30 minutes if I was going over characters and the world building together as a whole. So what we're going to do is we'll end off today's video here, and what we'll do next week is give you the remainder, being the characters and the world building, along with the wheel spin as I originally thought. But this way it breaks it up into two parts, so you're not sitting here listening to me talk for a good hour and a half, because that would be quite a bit too much. But anyway, hopefully you have a good rest of your day, and I will see you next Sunday. See ya.